Oh, you don't believe that? Allow me now to formally introduce a native son of Newark, sworn in as the 40th mayor of the city of Newark in May of 2014. Educated in the Newark Public Schools, our mayor received his BA in Political Science from Howard University, his master's in Education Supervision from St. Peter's University. In his immediate past role, our mayor served as principal of Central High School for 6 years, where he led the school's turnaround, resulting in Central having the highest graduation rate among all comprehensive high schools at the time of his departure in 2013. You may not be aware of our mayor's talents as a poet and writer. For example, Mayor Baraka is editor of In the Tradition, an anthology of young black writers, and that voice of the narrator you hear on the 1998 Lauryn Hill album, That's Before Your Time. This education of Lauryn Hill is that of our very own mayor. The mayor is also a modest man, so you will not hear him speak of the many honors and accolades he's received during his tenure, including receiving the U.S. Conference of Mayors Partner America 2018 Small Business Advocate Award, being featured among Ebony Magazine's Power 100, and featured on the, this is my favorite by the way, featured on the front page of the New York Times for defying expectations during his first year in office. Mr. Mayor, in preparation for your visit today, the class thoroughly examined videos from your recent State of the City address, and after your remarks, they will raise several questions in the following categories: improving educational outcomes, reducing crime, economic development, and the question of gentrification, affordable housing, and the inclusionary zoning ordinance. Class, a warm welcome for Newark's servant leader mayor, the Honorable Raj J. Baraka. The mayor can talk about whatever he wants to talk about, but one thing he might consider is talking about why you selected this path.
Yeah, to be an elected official.
To be an elected official, to be a servant to the people. They're learning about servant leadership, and they're curious as to your road to this seat.
Right. I don't think you have to be an elected official to be a servant. Right. You don't have to, just one pathway to make the changes and do the things you want to do in your community, in this country, in the state. An elected position is just one form of democracy. It's not all of it. Right? And so we get confused sometimes because that's the stuff we read about the most, and what you see in the paper, on TV, on these elected officials. But ultimately, there's like thousands of people that are really getting some real work done. We're not running for office. So it's important to know that part. In fact, some of the most influential people in politics have never held an elected position in their life. It's also important to know, for example, my father was very, very influential in the political landscape of this city in the late 60s, early 70s. Never held one office, ever. I started as an activist and an educator. I still consider myself an educator. I was in Newark Public Schools for almost 25 years. I started off substitute teaching right out of college. I was still almost a teenager. From that point, I began going further in Newark Public Schools, do a Board of Education, and I got to get back out of the Newark Public Schools thing. And I became a teacher, and then a vice principal and principal. But all the time I was organizing in the community. I ran for office several times after that. I ran for mayor when I was 24 years old. I also was an elementary school teacher at the time. Ran for councilman at large several times after that. So I ran for about 16 years before I actually won anything.
Wow.
And we used to march down to City Hall all the time for police brutality, severe complaint review board, trying to get them to pass a complaint review board. We used to march down there for various things, to right to speak at the municipal council meetings. We used to march, do all the marching and protesting, and I was doing that a lot. And then, I was like, at some point, we keep marching down to City Hall, obviously it's something down there that we need to do or get, so somebody's got to go in the building, right? So we ran a campaign on a shoestring budget, raised $10,000, and I ran for mayor at 24 years old. Made the ballot, got enough signatures to get on the ballot, so I was in all of the debates. Funny looking at myself at those debates today. It's interesting, the topics are almost the same, given a few kind of nuances today. Like we weren't talking about gentrification then because we were at a whole different stage. In 1994, you know, it was still a city that was recovering from the Newark Rebellion in 1967. We hadn't really completely recovered from that. So we still haven't in some aspects, but you know, there was a whole different set of discussions at that time. So, you know, that's what drove me there most of the time. And then most of the work I was doing in education, I always found myself advocating for the young people and their parents, jobs, housing, people, you know, don't have a place to live, you know, folks having problems over the weekend, you know, after school. So I always found myself advocating for them. So it was almost a natural kind of thing. Besides my family, you know, have always been engaged and involved in community politics. So it was almost a natural kind of progression for me to do that. And once I ran, you know, it's like getting into a fight. You know, you might be scared until you get punched and you realize, you know, they didn't knock me out. You know what I mean? So you get the bug and you're like, you know, I can actually do this. And, you know, one thing led to another. And most people would have given up after they lost the third time. But I was like a crazy person, so I kept doing it. And I ran and I won South Ward Councilman. Yeah, and in 2010. So I was the councilman for one term, and then I ran for mayor in 2014, and ran and won as the mayor in 2014. So that's my trajectory, you know, in Newark politics.
An impressive one. Ready for the questions, sir?
Yeah, that's what
All
I
right,
want
so I'm
to
going
do.
to exercise the prerogative of the chair and raise the first one. The hardest thing any mayor can do is to maintain focus on a vision for a city. How do you work each day to move past the daily distractions to sustain the focus on the vision for a brighter future?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, one, you actually have to have one, right? Actual vision. And then you have to, you know, so the things that you're fighting are systemic. And we often lose sight of that, right? And it's easy to lose sight of that if you don't have any kind of historical background, like you don't have a historical context of what you're doing. And a lot of folks that get in these seats and they don't have historical context, and the people who are out in the community, they don't have one either because they're not learning it, right? So it's not really their fault. They just don't learn the historical context. You don't get that whole picture in school or anywhere else. You just know you have a problem and you want somebody to fix the problem. The issue with that is the problems are intractable and systemic, and they can't be fixed in a day or a month because they didn't get created in a day or a month or even 4 years for that matter. These are difficult issues, and so they go past individuals, and so it doesn't matter who you put there. Well, it does matter, but you know, in some aspects it doesn't matter because those problems are so dug in and systemic that it's going to take more than goodwill to fix them, or just your political ideology alone is not going to change anything, right? You actually have to make some things happen. I think, you know, King Gibson was in a meeting. Unfortunately, he passed, and we're going to have his stuff Thursday. He's a good example of an elected official who took the reins in a very difficult time period in this country and in the city of Newark, for that matter. People expected him to do so much with so little in a very small period of time, with problems that were so insurmountable to most people, right? And so what you have to do is understand that it's systemic, and so you're not creating programs, because our job is not to create programs, right? Other people out here creating programs. Our job is to try to put dents in a system that is designed to put us in a position that we're in
So we're trying to really create new systems. And it's difficult when, people like to talk about destroying systems, right? And so I've learned that that's not a good way to organize, right? Because people get turned off from the people you're actually trying to organize are not really interested in destroying anything, right? They want to build something. And what is difficult for us to understand, sometimes activists, elected officials, progressives, is two things can't occupy the same place at the same time. It's science. So when you're building something, you're actually destroying something else. So it's important to spend a lot of focus on what you're going to build, right? And what you're trying to create and see. And people are more apt to organize and come together with you around things that you want to create as opposed to things that you want to destroy, right? And in creating these things, they begin to see that the other things are obstacles in their way and realize that those things need to be removed in order for these other things to take their place. And so I focus a lot on trying to build what I want to see. And put people in places that can help me build what I want to see, which is the most difficult part of all of it is personnel, but building the things that you want to see. And that's how I stay focused on, like, being an architect, really. This is what we want to build. This is what we want to see. And so we focus on trying to get those things done, despite all of the obstacles, the yelling, the noise, the this, the that, everything that's in the way. We build. We just keep building. We keep building. And, after a while, people begin to see what you're building, and most people want to help build it. So they want to get involved and say, "Oh, that's it. That's what you're trying to do. I want to be. I want to be in that." So people are starting to build, and even the folks who were like some of the loudest saying, now they see that there's something being created. They say, "I want to get involved in that, and I want to build that as well." That's actually smart to do. I want to be a part of that, and you win people over that way. Because it's really about, as you're trying to serve people, you're really trying to win them over, right? And sometimes we read a few things, we get smart, and we forget that we didn't know it a month ago. Right, and then we're out here beating up other people because they don't know what you know, because nobody gave them the book that they gave you. You know what I'm saying? So, and instead of giving them the book, you're spending a lot of time talking about what they don't know, right? Which is problematic. I start off the State of the City talking about the Emancipation Proclamation, right? About my mother who would make us celebrate January the 1st as, the new year and celebrate the Emancipation Proclamation. And I was like a young, radical kid. I mean, some of these people think they're radical now. They should have seen me at 17, 18 years old. I mean, I was like, I'm not Emancipation Proclamation. Abraham Lincoln? Yeah, I was ranting and raving about that. I'm not celebrating the Emancipation Proclamation. I got older, I read and understood. As a kid in like the 1990s in America, like the Emancipation Proclamation looked very like a lame document to me. But I wasn't an escaped slave in 1850, right? I wasn't running from the Fugitive Slave Act then, right? Nobody was trying to put me back into slavery, bust me over the head and sell me into slavery, right? It wasn't, my life wasn't, precarious like that. So to an escaped slave in Virginia, the Emancipation Proclamation was the most radical thing they've ever seen. You understand what I'm saying? It was the most radical thing they've ever seen. And so that perspective, is what keeps me focused today. Like to say, these steps need to happen, despite the fact that people may not realize it now, today, but, history will absolve me, right? Somebody will see that this was necessary for us to do in order to make the 3 or 4 steps after that.
Gina will kick off the questions from the class.
Okay, so you mentioned before how gentrification wasn't always spoken about because Newark was still recovering from the rebellion. But now that it is, how do you and your team work to develop Newark, but at the same time maintain the affordability for Newark natives?
Well, so we working hard. If I told you it was easy, that would be a lie, right? Because, the way capitalism works, once you take the toothpaste out the tube, it's not getting back in, right? So once you press the button and you start the machinations of development in the city, so the mayor, no elected official really has any control over the market. right? Once the market begins, it begins. There's nothing you really can do about it. What you try to do is make the market go, and in a system we live under, you need that wealth and that development in order to use it to do other things, right? And so what happens is that around the country, people have waited too long to realize what the outcome of the market is going to be, like what it's going to do to the folks in their cities. And so so this is a like national dilemma. So once they figured it out, and like, wait a minute, like there's cities in places you wouldn't even imagine that are dealing with gentrification. Aspen, Colorado, right? So all of the workers, it's a resort town, but all of the workers that work there can't live in the actual town because it's just too expensive. So the mayor of Aspen, I have to meet with the mayor of Aspen the same way I have to meet with the mayor of East St. Louis, right? So what we try to do is do it early, and so you get attention from developers who say it's too early to do these things because then you're going to discourage the market and not have the development, right? So you have tension from both places telling you that it's too early, and then the tension of waiting too late. So there are basic things that I think you have to do. I mean, rent control is one of them. You have to have strong rent control. You have to have right to counsel so people aren't like frivolously evicted simply because they want to raise the rent on folks. You have to have policy in place that dictates when people can raise the rent and why they can raise the rent. Basically on CPI, on the Consumer Price Index. You also have to establish land banks or land trusts, right, to take certain parts of the city and hold it in abeyance and begin to make sure that only the affordable housing happens there. You slow it down and you kind of say this part of the city we need to, or this part of the street we're going to make sure there's affordability here. Inclusionary zoning is another piece of it, right, that says you have to have a certain amount of units in your construction in order to build this if you're getting subsidy from the city or variance from the city. You can't, because we live in this system, you can't force people to do anything unless they're getting something from you, right? So I can't just say everybody has to put affordable units in their apartments, right? Unless they're getting a tax abatement or they need a variance or a zoning request. Because it's their money and their property. They can do whatever they want with it, unless the city is adding to it, then we can't put any restriction on it, right? And they're fighting the state legislature and the courts now, trying to even make it impossible for us to do that, as greedy these people are. But, those are a few things. And then you have to fight for ownership. You have to make sure there's opportunities for people to own, like own their homes, own businesses, own the buildings. So these are like different tracks that you have to constantly make happen, and that's what we focus on, to try to get those things to take place, to try to mitigate it, because there's, in all honesty, there is no way that you're going to be able to stop the market from doing what it does, just objectively, right? What we can do is build and I always say like a barrier, right? Or something over it, like you have an avalanche. The market is like an avalanche, so you build something so when it comes down, it doesn't crush you. And that's what you're doing, and you're doing that until, nationally and other folks can figure out how to create something where we're not killing people or pushing people out, how you have a system that doesn't do that. But in the meantime, what you're really doing is giving people rafts to stay alive, right? Wow. In a ship, that may be sinking, right? So, and you're trying to save a few people, and that's to say that everybody is not going to be saved. And it's like a battle. You know that when you go into the war, right? Somebody's not coming home. We just want to make sure, we have more wins than losses here. But to assume there's not going to be any losses is really naive, and you don't understand the nature of the system you're in and the position that you're in that system, right? The very weakened position that you're in, particularly if you have folks who don't have jobs or people who are employed but are getting a very, very low wage. And so parallel to that, you also have to fight for the increase in people's wages so they can afford the things that are happening here. You gotta hold developers off, hold the things off, and people don't understand the market. So the last thing on that, so just so you can understand what I mean when I'm talking about the market. So in Manhattan, an affordable unit is about $3,000, right? That's affordable in Manhattan, right? Because the median income, the area median income, dictates the affordability, right? So it's about $3,000. That's the market, right? So because there's so much development there, that pushes over to Jersey City and Hoboken and West New York and all these places. And so that market becomes saturated, right? And so there's a whole group of people who obviously cannot afford $3,000 a month, right? But then if I'm developing in Harrison per se, which is close to Manhattan, right? Before I could only sell those apartments for $700, $800 a month. But now you got a whole group of people fleeing from New York and Jersey City who can't afford $3,000 a month, but they can afford $1,800 a month, right? So what that does is causes the landlords to say, I can get $1,800 for this property. And they wait for one person to get it. And once they're able to get those rents, the other people start charging the same rents. And so it gets to be $1,800 as opposed to $700 because the market has pushed all these people over here because it was $3,000 here. See, that's something that we don't have control over, right? It comes and they before they wasn't gonna come because there was no development, there was too much crime, it was this, it was that. So when you start improving things, then you become a victim of your own success. So when things you start improving it and the outlook of the city begins to change, people say, oh, maybe we can go there, or I would go there because the train station is there, I can get here, plus downtown is starting to look nice, so forth and so on. I'll go to Newark. Then you get people who can pay the $4,000, right? They'll come to Newark because for $4,000 in Newark, you can live on a penthouse floor.
Yes.
And get the same views of New York that you would get in Lower Manhattan, right? So I'll come there and pay $4,000 to live in a penthouse and Shaquille O'Neal's top floor for that. Of course I'll do that. And that's the market. And all of the developers and landlords want the money, so they're going to charge as much as they can get for that. So that's basically how it works. And so our job is to step in, try to mitigate that somehow, the best way we can.
Excellent. Rafaelita, speak up, please.
Hi, my name's Rafaelita again. My question is, how important do you find accountability, and how do you demand it not only from the institutions and programs you work to create, but also yourself to ensure you are being completely fair to investors, collaborators, and the people of Newark?
Well, it's difficult, right? So we create a culture of collaboration. I mean, if you speak to developers, the university community, all of these folks, they would tell you there's never been this level of collaboration in the city, probably ever, right? So just the level of dependability that we have on one another, the understanding that, we can't get these things done unless we do it together. In fact, the more difficult the thing is, the more collaboration you need to get what you want accomplished. And then you have to hold people accountable for those outcomes, right? Which is also difficult because everybody does not believe what you believe. That's why personnel and people and teams become important, because everybody, the city, we have 3,000 employees. If you think all of those employees believe what the mayor believes, the problem is I need those people to execute the things that I want to see created. And if they don't, if we're so far apart from the way we see it, it becomes difficult to get it done. So a lot of times it's not about their ability to do it, it's about their will, right? And so trying to make people see the world as you see it, at least partially, is a task by itself. That's what leaders have to do, to convince people that this pathway will lead us to victory, right? And not to veer off from this pathway or do something different. Because some people, you get one thing that goes wrong, people abandon ship immediately. Yeah. It's a constant trying to get people to understand that this is what needs to happen, to see your vision the way you see it. And that's really what the state of the city and all those other things are for, is to let people see where you're taking us. And that's what people say, because everybody, don't have your perspective. Not just your ideas, they don't have your perspective, meaning they're not at the same place you are, so they can't see it the same way you see it, right? So you have to articulate your perspective, especially to the people that are employed to execute what it is you're trying to get them to do. And you have to do that over and over again. It's tireless. I mean, it's tiring, and it's monotonous, but it's something that you have to do. You have to do it, or failure is imminent. If you don't convince these people that this is, and sometimes you're asking them to do very difficult things for very little pay and no appreciation, right? So you have to constantly do that, and then hold people accountable. Holding people accountable fairly, like, that there's a just way we're gonna handle the things that are going on around here in all aspects of where we are. Yeah.
Emanuela?
All right. Okay, so my question is, how has sustainability and growth changed or improved in the education sector in the city of Newark?
Well, it depends on the way you look at it, right? Or what you're looking at. If you want to say graduation rates, that's a good thing. Or our accessibility to the universities. When I was in high school, we didn't have this level of accessibility to these universities. We just didn't. In 1986, 87, we just didn't, wasn't a lot of people walking around with Rutgers shirts on. Yeah, I mean, it just wasn't. I mean, and a few people, and the people I knew went to Rutgers, New Brunswick. They was on the Livingston campus down there. So Rutgers Newark didn't have a real imprint in the city, though it was here. Neither did NJIT, neither did other these places. So that by itself, that kind of cultural shift, has an impact on students, has an impact on families, has an impact on teachers, on what they think the possibilities and the opportunities are. And I think it's showing, like, people and then it affects all the other surrounding institutions, because I really think higher education drives the educational community. Like the access, the same way that high schools drive elementary. When you're in elementary school, you're thinking about what high school you're going to go to, right? You're already imagining that. And I think that, and not only that, when the university begins to accept kids and dictates what they need, it sets the high schools up for how they should be preparing kids and what they should be preparing them for in order to have access to these universities. But if the people think you can't even get into those spaces, then that's not even a thought, right? And so that changes. Who has access to these things? We still have to work on. There's still deep inequity in the educational process in this city, and there's still deep inequity in educational attainment in the state of New Jersey, very deeply segregated by nationality and by economics, very deeply segregated in the city still in some aspects, but the worst thing that's the most segregated is the quality of the education that you're getting. It's segregated because of the programs that are available to specific kids are not equitable. So all of us don't have access to the same opportunities that everybody should have access to in this town.
Vicky?
Okay, so my question is, as a servant leader, you're required to have a strong sense of what's going on within yourself and within the community. How would you describe yourself as being aware with your personal beliefs with the reduction of crime rates and what's actually happening in the city?
Well, I live in Newark, right? So I don't live on a hill. I live in the South Ward on Shear Avenue. I mean, I live off Bergen Street, right? So I go to the store here, I hang out here, I know what's happening. Besides, we do work with Rutgers and other people to get real data, because data is important, right? There is anecdotal information, and then there's empirical data, right? So the anecdotal information is good, but you really need data, because you can't make leadership decisions based on your feelings, right? You have to make decisions based on what actually is happening, right? And then you have to understand that people's experiences are different depending on where they are, right? Your perspective is different depending on where you live and where you are. So in Newark, in 80% of the areas in the city, 80% of the areas in the city do not experience violent crime. 80%. That's good on its face, but on the flip side of that, it means that the majority of the violence happens in about 20% of the city, right? Which means if you live in that area where the 20% area, it feels like you live in hell, right? Because all of the things that are wrong are happening there, right? In that place. So it's like zip code determinism, right? So you can go 4 or 5 blocks away and have an entirely different experience, right? And so, which helps us in terms of reduction, because we didn't know that until we brought Rutgers on, right? And begin to get the real empirical data. So it helps us to focus more energy and time on areas where things are happening, and that's why you see reduction, and begin to put alternative stuff in that place. But, you know, though we have come far, we understand we have to go farther, right? There's a lot more to do. And as long as the conditions exist that create crime, you always gonna have it. And so it's important for us to attack the conditions that create crime, right? And that takes a longer period of time than it does to just arrest people and focus on violence and crime and putting police in areas and doing all of those kinds of things. There's a trauma kind of informed strategy that we have to use that we just really getting people to buy into, I would say, in the last 2 years. You know, figuring out that we just don't need to hire 1,000 more cops, right? That we have to figure out how to deal with the deeply embedded issues that occur in these communities that make crime happen in this area all the time for the last 50 years, right? Why is it happening here as opposed to the other part of the city? To look at it scientifically as opposed to looking at it, you know, emotionally or anecdotally, right? Why is it happening over there? Like, you know, and police talk about that, you know, oh, they always, you can't, that's what a crime is. What are you doing over here on this block, you know? And when they talk to you like that, why are you in this area? This is a crime area, right? That's how they say when they stop you on the street, it's a crime area, you got caught in a crime area. Like, so what they're saying is that the area itself is conducive to crime as opposed to the other area. And you have to figure out why is that? Why? And if you talk to the police, anecdotally, some of them will come up with all kind of crazy notions. Some of it racist, some of it bizarre, right? Some of it is uninformed, right?
Monica.
So we're touching on a lot of issues in our discussion, both today and throughout our class, such as crime, gentrification, economic development, and I always feel like the root for our solution is education, and you come from an education background. You kind of answered my question a little bit when you answered her question, but I think Rutgers does a really great job in keeping Newark talent in Newark. They try to connect us as much as they can to the organizations around us, which is absolutely amazing. But graduating from East Side, and also I did some volunteer work for West Side, I don't feel like enough focus is put on students that are not necessarily pursuing higher education. So I always wondering, how do you think that we can invest in the students and kind of nudge them in a way? There's very high paying jobs that don't need higher education.
Absolutely.
I feel like if we invested in these kids, because there's so much Newark talent being wasted sometimes. These kids are kind of thrown into the world with a high school diploma, and they don't know what to do. So what kind of programs or what do you think we could do in our education system to kind of look after these students that are not necessarily going to Rutgers or Essex County or NJIT, but are when entering the workforce and contributing to our city? And so they're also not one of those people that are going to be priced out of our city as well.
So first, there's about 4,000 to 6,000 kids who are not in school and don't have employment at all, right? The opportunity youth that we focus a lot on, right? Through MBK, through Newark Street Academy, through things like that. But we need to do that more. We need to expand it. We need more money in those areas. So that's goes back to what I was saying before of trying to convince people that that's the pathway, right? I can say that till I'm blue in the face. I can go outside and have a sign and march, but I'm not an activist anymore, right? That's not my job. I actually have to do something. So we have to convince people to divert resources into those areas as the answer. And it was difficult because prior to that, people believed that crime is a genetic, has some genetic relationship to crime, right? That crime and violence. And so if you have this idea that there's always going to be crime and violence because of this person and not because of the system or the environment, then you don't invest in it because you think it's a waste of money, right? And that the answer is we just need more money for more police, more guns, more this, more that, right? So and obviously people are beginning to see that has a temporary fix, and it creates other problems that they don't want anymore, right? Everyone want these problems. They don't want stop and frisk. They don't want illegal searches and seizures. They don't want people getting shot in the back running from traffic stops or killed at recreation centers. They don't want to. Well, sane people don't, right? So, right. So they're beginning to understand that we have to look at this differently, like trauma-informed care. Now, what do we need to do for that 5,000 to 6,000 plus the other thousands of young people, like you said, who are not in these universities, are not interested in that? How do we get them in tech spaces? How do we get them to repair, computers or engines and all these? And I'm not talking about car engines. I'm talking about engines that are like at the airport, that are now computerized, all this other kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of people thinking about how to approach it in that direction, but we need a heavy shift in our thinking to begin to push leaders in that direction, corporate leaders, public leaders, everybody in the direction of saying that this is the answer, or one of the answers to this issue, as opposed to investing all our money in policing strategies, right? Which is what people invest in now, cameras, police strategies, this, that, as opposed to even now body-worn cameras as an answer to the violence that's going to come from police, because you've got police officers trying to solve social issues that they're not equipped to do, right? And instead of investing in that, you invest in more and more on the police side. And so we're trying to fix that, right? We just had a huge meeting with all of the providers in the city, trying to get them to form something called a Brick City Peace Collective. Everybody that's doing alternative policing work, doing trauma-informed care, all these organizations. And we're going to have a meeting with all the police agencies coming up to get them to begin thinking about diverting some of their resources to those organizations to begin doing work that will help them police communities differently. And they go hand in hand, right? Because the organizations that I'm talking about deal with those young people that you're addressing in an educational and socially emotional way that helps them stay away from crime, but also leads them towards school and employment. And so all of those are interrelated in one way or another. But we have to do that. I mean, we got the state to give us $1 million, a measly $1 million in the scheme of things to do the street academy. We have to keep fighting for that every year. And that gets us about 60 kids a year. We pay them $10 an hour to go back to school, to go in street academy, to get re-engaged in school, to find a job, to do all this other kind of stuff. But it's a small amount in a sea of a whole bunch of people that are out here doing that. So it's like a pebble we throwing into an ocean. And so we need more resources and more folks like you who understand that this is the way and begin to push it as the answer to these problems. The last part of it is what I said about education. You got a bunch of kids that are not in those spaces. We tend to look at things based on what's not working as opposed to what is working. So we'll be in meetings and talk about, 80% of the kids are not graduating or not in these programs. And I like to flip it on its head. And I spoke to the superintendent. I said, let's look at the kids that are successful, right? All these kids are successful. Where are they? Like, what did they do? What school did they go to? What programs were they in? What did they do in the summertime? Who were they associated with? What are they doing? And why we can't get more kids in those spaces? Then we began looking at those spaces like that. We see the deliberate absence of very specific populations of people that are not in those spaces. I say deliberate because it was purposeful. not to make sure that certain people were not in those spaces, right? Even if you look at the magnet schools in the city of Newark, they target specific elementary schools, period, right? And it is done purposefully and deliberately and intentionally. So the outcomes you get, you shouldn't be surprised at, right? But they don't even see it until you break it down and show them, like, look, let's look at this space. The people that we talking about, they're not in this space. There's no black and brown boys in this space. They're not in this space. They're not in that space. They're not in this space. They're not in that space. They're not in this space. So where you expect them to be, right? Where do you expect them to be? And how do we figure out how to change that?
Zamora.
So even though graduation rates have gone up, it seems to be like a notice initiative like keeping more residents and students in colleges financially. Like I noticed, well, I was from Arts High School, and some of the people I graduated with, they were unable to finish college because of financial issues. So I was wondering, what other ways do you think we should improve on that? Because I know Rutgers Newark has a program for Newark students to come here with a not full internship, but like full tuition. So I was thinking, like, what do you think we should be doing about this?
You said it. That's the answer. They need full tuition. That's it, right there. And that's what we say to NJIT. We forcing them to do the same thing. We trying to force people to do the same thing. Honestly, my opinion, I think education should be free. Yeah, that's what I believe. I mean, the country is pushing now towards at least community college being free. I think that's a first step. Because now what you're saying is only rich people can get an education, or people that have access to these scholarships or grants, all these other kind of things. At the end of the day, it's becoming more and more expensive to be a student in this country, and so we have to, that's something that we should hold a banner up for, and figure out how to make that happen. Not just yell about it, but figure out how to make it happen, right? Yeah, you be smart enough to figure out how to get it done. Because saying you want to do it is different than actually doing it, right?
Ming Hao?
Hi, so my question is, so we have lots of policies or charities for helping people in need, especially people in poverty. And but actually some people like quit their job only to be fit in for beneficial policies. So I want to know how do you balance the relationship between offering help and keeping people from relying on the government only?
Well, I think, and that's a good question. First of all, I think there's some basic stuff that people need, right? And we no matter, that's why I believe in universal basic income. I think that we need to take it, we can put somebody on the moon, but we can't make sure everybody got food. I think that's a problem, right? We have to figure that out. And I think we have the resources and the brains to do that here, in this country. We can do that. We have enough wealth and enough brilliant people to figure out how to make sure everybody has food on their table. That's number one. Two, I think that it's important that we develop people's imagination, their creativity, their spirit to want to be engaged and involved in community and development. I think, people want to create, they want to build. I mean, you're naturally born trying to do something. People aren't naturally born just to lay in their house and go to bed, right? You naturally want to be active, want to be engaged, you want your mind to develop, your body to develop. I think we have to engage people, create opportunity for them. And I don't think most people will rely on the government. They don't want to. Most people want to work. I mean, they want to have social interaction. That's just a natural inclination. They want to get out here and build. And I think the idea that saying that people are going to rely on the government is like a small, thing that we always fall back on, not to help the majority of the people, right? The majority of people, that's like saying, people say they don't believe in basic income because people are going to get the money and buy drugs, or, they're going to get the money and waste it and gambling. People say that because, invariably there may be some people that do that, right? So one fantasy to the next, people say, hey, nobody's going to do that. Well, that's not true. Some people are going to do that, right? But I don't think that's the majority of the people. Majority of people are going to spend their money on rent, right? On food, right? That's what they're going to spend their money. Rent will probably be the number one thing people spend their money on. If they got an extra $400 a month, they're going to spend it on their rent. You know, I know because there are people who don't pay rent for 5 months waiting for their income tax to come, so they can take their income tax and pay all of the back rent because they had to use the rent money to do all kinds of other things. I know that because I live in Newark. You understand what I'm saying, right? I was born and raised here, so I know people are doing that. People do that with their mortgage too, by the way. But you know, that little bit of money will go towards housing, will go towards food, will go towards, you know, resources for their children, clothes. So it'll go back into the economy, right, to help, you know, stimulate the economy. And the money that the things that people have access to are not enough for them to lay back and do nothing. It's just not enough. You're not giving them $1 million. Like people that get SNAP and food stamps and welfare now, the money is so small. You know, the amount that you're getting is so paltry. When people like say things like, oh, you know, these people, they're living off welfare. You can't live off welfare. It's impossible for you to live off of welfare. It's not humanly possible. It's just, you can't pay your rent, you can't eat food, you can't buy clothes, you can't travel, you can't do things off welfare. It's impossible. Most people want welfare and a job. If they can get welfare and a job, they would take it. 100%. I believe that completely and totally. You know, because the human spirit wants to work. I believe that.
Medina.
Alright, so my question isn't really based off these, it's more so kind of like a personal thing. I know you mentioned about your father earlier, and he was a writer, and I think most of his things were like, you know, dealing like Black liberation and stuff like that. So how did his views kind of like affect your views as you know, in your transition, even as a leader, even before that?
Well, a lot. You know, my father, you know, transitioned a lot in his life. You know, when he died, he was you know, a socialist, right? You know, he believed in socialism, communism, as a matter of fact. You know, when he passed away, so he was like always evolving in his ideas. You know, of course it affects you as a child growing up, but I would say the most thing that affected me was his love of study and reading, right? Because there's books all over the house, man. Books in the bathroom, in the living room, in the kitchen. Everybody have books in their kitchen. You know, there's books everywhere, you know? So you naturally get this inclination to want to read because they're all over you. In fact, he used to give us presents with a book, right? Put money in the book, and you open the book because you want the money. But you wind up, you know, later on in life, you'd be like, oh, that's the book my dad gave me. And then you go back and start, you know, reading that book, you know? So my desire to want to know what I'm talking about definitely came from him. And the desire to want to help and build the community and not give up, knowing that he would say it's a protracted or unity and struggle. He would say, like, yeah, you have to struggle with people and then unite with them and struggle and unite and struggle and unite. And I don't think we've gotten grasp of that as progressives in this place yet. Knowing that we're not going to always agree, but we have to agree to struggle with one another, but unify and still be unified at the same time, knowing that our individual differences are smaller than the big things we need to unite around.
Michael.
Hi. My question is, as new industries move into Newark, such as the Prudential Center, how do you, because like I come out, I'm from the suburbs, so how do you let the people from Newark benefit instead of people like me who have to come in from the suburbs to work?
Well, you have to tax them. Two, you know, you do what's called community benefits agreements now. We do that now. So when developers come, you have to put together an agreement in terms of the things that they're going to give the city in relationship to what they get, right? And you know, whether it's tax abatements, you know, and a tax abatement is, so you know, what it does, it stabilizes your taxes, right? So every year as the taxes go up, yours don't, right? So if I'm a developer, the taxes go up, mine don't. I pay the same amount for 15 years or 20 years, and the banks give me a loan based on that tax abatement. But because you're not paying the same amount of money, we get to ask you to do something for the city. Now that wasn't always the case. It's a matter of policy now, right? One of the things is you have to, if you're building residence, you have to have a certain amount of affordability. You also have to have a minority co-developer on your on your development, right? So You can't just develop a property and say, oh, we hiring 3 or 4 people. No, you have to have a minority co-developer. So what it's done is force a lot of these developers out here to go look for people in the city that are minorities that are doing development and partner with them and say, I need you on my project. Well, now I can't do the project if you're not on my project. So you got some of these young folks that are out here creating these development companies who are getting a lot of business because of that. They know that it exists, so they go into them and they get them. So, and I've been able to see that and witness it. So it's a good thing. And I think as a result of that, more stuff is going to happen. A lot farther than where we need to be, but I think that a lot of benefit has been gotten because of those policies that we've created. That deep.
So back in 2013, when Barack Obama came to Newark to talk about the criminal justice reform legislation that he wanted not to have the box on job applications which said that you would be incarcerated or if you were incarcerated, has that, from that time till now, has that helped Newark residents who have been incarcerated get jobs?
Yeah, some of them, definitely. Definitely. Some people have, but it doesn't say that they can't check later. It just says that it can't be on the application and they can't deny you an interview. So it's gotten a lot of people in the door, probably got them the opportunity to introduce themselves to people who they never had the opportunity to do. They didn't have the opportunity before the legislation, because now people can take them at their own merit, right? And say, I really like this guy. I'm take a risk, take a chance on this young person because, I got a chance to talk to them and see their background as opposed to look at the application and say you've been arrested up, that's it, So I think it's been helpful. There's a lot more work we need to do, I'm fighting with this marijuana stuff to get the expungement thing in it, that's the only thing I'm concerned about, People smoke weed if they want to. I'm trying to get people to get their records expunged and people get out of jail, I fight with the church, all the people all day about this stuff, man, but,
Clayton.
So, I just wanted to ask, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but considering the attractive amenities that are offered by the city of Newark, like its proximity to New York City, the station, things like that, of course, affordable housing, compared to New York's affordable housing, it seems like there's a certain demographic that's been attracted to the city.
Sure.
And I just wanted to ask you if you could just shed some light on what you think that demographic is, and
Sure.
after discussing that, I want to ask if you have any incentives for young families. Like I'm a young married man with a child, and I'd love to stay in the city of Newark, but
Absolutely.
I'd like to know a little bit more.
We can have an online and offline conversation about that. But I think right now people be surprised at the demographic that's being attracted. So you're getting a lot of people from New York, Brooklyn, Harlem, Bronx, people who have experienced a level of gentrification that has already displaced them, right? So they're coming here. In fact, there are a lot of people from Brooklyn who are coming to Newark buying homes, right? And this whole picture of what we see when we see gentrification is different than the people that we're getting now, right? So we're getting there's a lot of people, a lot of abandoned homes in the Weequahic section, for example, a lot of families from New York City that lived in Brooklyn who the rent they was paying, they got a job and it saved their money, they paid the down payment and used some of the programs that exist, and the rent they was paying they might as well pay a mortgage, and so they're doing that. And then you get a lot of millennials from different parts that want to live in a downtown area, or people that work in the industries downtown, they're moving into those apartments, right? So people that work at Audible, at Prudential, at PSE&G, a lot of folks are saying, I want to stay here because it's going to save me money instead of back and forth commuting all day. Plus, it's cooler for me to stay downtown Newark because I have access to all of the stuff that's going on. Plus, I can get to New York in 15 minutes, right? So they're choosing to live downtown. Those are the people who actually work down there. And we get in a small sector of retired folks from suburban communities who are selling their homes and saying, I'm going to sell my home and move downtown Newark, right? They're retired. They want to live down. So what they're actually doing, and I know like 3 of them personally.
Empty nesters.
Right, exactly. They're leaving. They're selling their home and they're taking part of the money and they're investing it in retirement homes outside of the state, right? And then they're living in downtown Newark, right? which is what they're doing. So that's what that. It's a very interesting demographic that's happening now. So we have first-time home buyers things. We have opportunities now where we are giving minority developers the opportunity to develop these homes, these properties. So they're gonna and we use the money from inclusionary zoning to invest in those deals, so they can drop the mortgage and the rent in those areas even lower than what it is, to make it more affordable for first-time home buyers and people that's renting in specific areas of the city. I mean, I get into debates with people about that because people are saying we don't want affordability just in certain parts of the city. It's like the state argument that says, I'm not gonna develop in Millburn, so I'm gonna give you the money to develop in affordable housing in Newark because I don't want it in Millburn. And they're debating that on a state level now, whether you know that or not, the COA legislation that requires everybody to have a certain amount of affordability in their city. Everybody has to have that. So what mayors are doing, they're arguing that we don't want it here because they have an idea of what affordability is some crazy notion in their head. But they rather give us the money to build affordable stuff in the city. So I'm on both sides of that issue, you know what I mean? Because self-determination and democracy, I believe that they should not be absolved from their requirement to put affordability in their community. But secondly, I believe that we have a right not to want to go there, right? And so we need to invest in the communities that have been run down and make sure that we have decent affordable housing in these cities for people that need it. So I don't think Newarkers want to rush and live downtown Newark. I just don't see it. I live here all my life. I don't see people who lived on Osborne Terrace all their life say, oh, we're going to move our family downtown Newark. It's not going to happen. They don't even have the space to do that, right? It's not going to happen. People would rather live in their own neighborhood. They just want it to be different, right? And so our job is to find wealth and capture the wealth that's coming in and transfer it to other communities so we can benefit from that and redevelop those neighborhoods so people can have a true choice to say, I want to live on my own block in my own community because it's nice, right? And not have to be forced to figure out where else they want to live because the neighborhood they live in looks terrible, right? And that's basically what the vision is, what the architectural thing I talked about at the beginning, that's what it is. How do we repair those neighborhoods? Inclusionary zoning for me is really not about getting people to live in a Shaquille O'Neal's building, right? That's like a seed, right? Because we can't even fit all of the people we need in Shaquille O'Neal's building, right? Or the 10 buildings that are gonna come up downtown.
Yes. Thank you.
Sarah?
Yes. My question is if you received $1 million grant to use for the city in any way you wanted, in any way you could, what would you do with it and why?
Try to get another $1 million. I mean, there's a lot of things we could use the money for. $1 million is very small amount of money. I mean, it's a lot for us personally, but you know, in terms of a city budget and the stuff that we have to do, it's like asking for $10. Like, we run a street academy program, like I said, for 26 kids throughout the year, well, 60 kids, excuse me, throughout the year, you know, and it costs us $1 million. So right now, that would help us around issues around homelessness, you know, particularly transitional homes, right? These kids from Central High School came up with this great idea. They built a modular home out of containers for emergency preparedness. But now we're getting them to think about, with the engineering company, how to use that for homelessness and not emergency preparedness. So that would help us see that, to get these kids to push their program, and maybe because it only cost them $25,000 to $50,000 to build that thing out, which is crazy, right? And they paid like $1,500 for the container, right? So, I mean, these kids, you know, came up with this stuff, and that's why I think you guys got the answer, right? Because I wasn't sitting in my office thinking about spending $1,500 for no container turned to emergency preparedness thing, right? So they came with the idea, and it would cost $25,000 to $50,000 to do. So $1 million, we could seed that right away and begin doing some real work around transitional homelessness in the city.
Vanessa?
So New Jersey has recently passed the minimum wage, which will happen gradually. Right. There's concerns from people about it causing inflation, and then there's people who believe that it will make living valuable. My question to you is, do you believe it would accelerate the rising rents that are happening in Newark, or do you believe it would benefit the city of Newark?
Oh, it's absolutely benefit people. Every time we raise the minimum wage, they make the same argument. You know, that it's gonna cause inflation, this is gonna happen, that's gonna happen, but every time it's raised, right? And the world moves on, right? So it's the same arguments people use all of the time. I have not seen, we raised it to $8, right? $5 to $8, now $15. I don't see, I do think small businesses need time to prepare, right? So that's the reason I didn't want to do it gradually. But I just don't see any real proof that any of those things are just going to happen. I just don't see that, you know. In fact, most of that money goes back into the economy. People raise their prices because they can, right? Because, you know, the market allows them to do it, and they're going to do it. If they're not regulated, they're going to raise their prices on everything, you know, on food, on housing, on whatever, unless it's regulated, right? And that's why you got certain groups of people who oppose the regulation, because they don't want to they want to be able to make a huge infinite amount of money, and at the expense of everybody else. So, it needs to be regulated.
Edgar.
Well, I have two questions. And the first one, Mr. Mayor, it's what would you tell a student, future mayor, in terms of how to get involved with the city, serving, and also creating a vision for the city, also in terms of reading and growing? And the second one is, what is your biggest challenge as a mayor?
So I would say, you know, Ken Gibson helped me a lot, man. He's gone, you know, I got a chance, I'm gonna speak at the funeral. It's gonna be emotional for me, but he helped me a lot in my last years. His last years, just giving me good advice. But I would say, if you're trying to be the mayor, then be the mayor now, right? Meaning, most people think that by going to like these events, and so a lot of people, they run for office, and then you don't see them no more, then they run for office. And they think by going to the council meetings and yelling at the council meetings, they do that, they get tired of it, and they miss them for 2 years, then they run for office again. None of that is going to avail anything. You have to go and be genuinely a part of the community. Like, you have to be a part of the organizational stuff. I taught, I coached basketball, you know, I had after-school programs for kids, teaching them history. We did feeding and clothing drives, we marched, we organized, we did all of those things, and I still didn't win, right? So you have to be in a long haul if you're trying to do it yourself, like trying to build the organization yourself. The funny thing is, I was at a debate when I was running again, and somebody asked me, was accusing me of having an organization. Like, oh, I am the, you know, you got the big organization now, and I have the small. And you know, it was funny to me because I was thinking, dang, 20 years ago, I had nothing, zero. No, I had $10,000 and my brother. You know? And the 3 people I knew that I grew up with. You understand what I'm saying? And we did fish fries in my mother's house, right? Building an organization takes time. You have to be committed to do that, right? Or you can hook up and be a part of one of these large organizations, and so it depends on what you want to do, right? So if you want to get elected that way and really the difficult thing about it is if you get driven to work every day, you don't know your own way, right? So you use GPS all the time. When the GPS is gone, you get lost, right? So a lot of people depend on other people to take them to the promised land, but when them people walk away, they got to walk away too. So you just have to figure out what route you want to do and understand, like the route that I took is a long and monotonous and difficult pathway, right? Or you can go to one of these people and say, I want to be this, and they, you know, work for them, and they like you, and they can endorse you, and you can run and be whoever you want to be, you know, as long as you're going to help them.
And your biggest challenge?
Biggest challenge is people. It's always the challenge, man. Personnel is the challenge, and having the endurance to win people over all of the time with ideas. Like, personnel is the #1 challenge, right? #1, right? People trying to get a balance between people you can trust and people you can trust, right? People you can trust you know, personally and with your ideas and stuff, and people you can trust to do the job, right? So just because you have the ideology don't mean you have the capacity. And because you have the capacity don't mean you have the ideology. So is trying to find that person is very, very hard unless you have a factory and you're producing them, right? So it's hard. And so you run through people, you change, you do all this other stuff. It's difficult. That's the number one most difficult thing.
Israel.
Israel. So during the State of the City, you mentioned the idea of universal basic income. You briefly went over it today and the benefits of it. My question would be, how would a system like that be implemented in the city of Newark?
So we're going to get a pilot first. So these people, we're going to do a study, we're going to do a pilot, certain amount of people, we're going to target them and see what actually happens, the outcomes. So it's not anecdotally anymore. I'm not just talking about what I think is going to happen. We can actually have an idea what actually did happen. We want to be able to create a fund where we can do that, right? And how we create that fund and where we get that money from is still, you know, trying to engineer that, you know. So conservatives like it because they think that we're going to get rid of all the entitlement programs and give people $50 as opposed to welfare, Medicaid, you know, all these other programs, right? So that's why they support it. While it may help reduce some funding in that, I still think some of those programs have to remain, you know, because of where we are, right? And how expensive things is right now. So we really trying to figure that out, trying to create a fund where we can use that fund to begin to distribute to the people in this town, right? And use our dollars and private dollars in that fund to get it done. So while we are doing the testing, like the test time, we'll be trying to figure out how to sustain it.
Sue Ann.
Okay. Oof. I interned last summer at FP Youth Outcry, and they're one of the trauma-informed nonprofits probably that you were talking about.
That's right.
Luckily, I was exposed to a lot of your initiatives. One of them being the Newark Street Team.
Right.
So, what are your plans to sustain these initiatives after you leave? Because it's commonly known after Mayor leave, another initiative starts, and maybe they wipe out the previous ones. But these initiatives, I mean, I was there, I witnessed it, and I was blown away at the civic engagement there. What are your plans to keep it?
Well, you have to systematize it, right? So that's why we are meeting with the police agencies so they can divert funding to a pot that will be used to finance these organizations and initiatives, and that they become a part of the police strategy in the city. So it becomes embedded in the department, right? In the health department and in the police department. You know, so and if there's a whole lot of them. We got the Shani Baraka Center on domestic violence. Domestic violence in this city is probably and people don't talk about it, is the highest and most difficult problem we have in terms of crime in the city. People think it's young people and gangs and all that, domestic violence. Over 50% of our aggravated assaults are domestic violence, right? Over 50%. Just if you choke somebody in a domestic thing, it's aggravated assault now, right? So all of, you know, maybe 10, 15% of our homicides are domestic violence, right? So, I mean, all we have to, that's why we have to systematize all of that stuff so they're not just programs,
Yes, sure.
right? And just an anecdote about why that's important. At University Hospital, and I said this at the State of the City, that a gentleman was shot. The doctor worked on him at University Hospital and then referred him to the Street Academy, right? And so that's because they have a relationship. We have these meetings with the trauma-informed stuff that you're talking about, where the doctor can call the Street Academy. And what's crazy about that, and I tell my staff this, is, you know, the doctors at UMDNJ know we have the Street Academy, but the workers at City Hall don't. Which is a problem, right? Maybe because they work with that population and they have to figure these things out. But we have to figure out how to make it common knowledge of what's happening around here.
Tara.
Okay, so I know you mentioned it briefly earlier when you touched on the students coming up with the idea for the pods, but I wanted to know if there were any programs in place currently to help reduce homelessness in the city of Newark.
Yeah, I mean, but besides the shelters and, you know, all of the things that we do now, which, you know, the city itself does more in trying to prevent homelessness than we actually do trying to get people off of homelessness, right? So the county probably does a better job in providing people welfare and pathways from homelessness to housing, right? With the Housing Authority and HUD, they give people vouchers and they let them go and find housing elsewhere. You know, we help get people jobs, do all this. So we have money to prevent people from getting homeless, to allow you to pay your rent for the month when you don't have the money, to allow you to pay your mortgage for the month when you don't have the money, to help you find jobs, to do all these other kind of things when you're right there. Like, so we have more, we're more aggressive in that area and more equipped. You know, we made a mistake in trying to get into the sheltering part of it, which was a mistake on our part. And so we began to retract that, and begin to fund organizations who do that better than the city. We are now trying to shift and invest more in transitional housing and work with the county to move people out off of homelessness, and got the Hope One van so we could attack drug addiction and mental health, because there's different types of homelessness, right? We see homeless people on the street, like that's the ones we used to seeing, like people that might have a drug addiction problem or a mental health problem. But there are a lot more people that are homeless that we don't see, that the city spends more time dealing with, like families that live with other families, somebody that just lost their job and sleeping on a couch, right? You know, folks that just lost, you know, they're out of work and they're in the street. So that are living in a shelter, you know, in the daytime, but there are people actually go to work in the daytime and sleep in a shelter at night. So we have done a good job, like I said, at trying to deal with those people, but the really like aggressive homelessness that's out here, mental health, drug addiction, families on the street, we have to you know, create strategies, and some of it, like I said, it should be around transitional housing, and that's what we're going to focus a lot of our attention on. Because we use our transitional housing now for when we abate homes. Like we get a lot of money for lead abatement, like you know, and not pipes but homes, because most of the kids in Newark get lead from dust in their house. So we have to abate the home, put them in another house until they finish and put them back. So a lot of our money is used for that. So we need dollars around transitional housing for homelessness.
Anastasia.
So you mentioned earlier how there's like 80% of neighborhoods in Newark that don't experience that bad of a crime rate, or that don't experience it at all, and that there's 20%. Yeah. And that there's 20% that experience violent crime, and it's, you know, like hell for them. So I guess I want to ask, within that 20%, do you have any plans or ideas that could help potentially improve or reduce the
Sure.
crime?
I mean, and we have, but most of those strategies are police oriented, right? And then it's and I don't want to say that completely, because the New York Community Street Team is there. You got other stuff there that's trying to reduce that. We just have to measure empirically how much effect that has actually had on it, because the police take a lot of credit for it. You know, we don't know what these other agencies are doing. But there's a lot of work we have to do in place-based strategies. So we have to, you know, figure out how to interrupt trauma, right? Data shows that you live in a household with people that have been arrested, you're more likely to be arrested. You experience a violent crime, you're more likely to commit a violent crime. We know this data. We know this data now. So how do we interrupt these cycles? And so the police are not designed to interrupt those cycles, right? And so we have to convince people, like, we can't just play cat and mouse here. They get excited, we reduce crime for 4 years, we reduce crime for 2 years, it go back up the next year, reduce it another 2 years, goes back up the next year, and it becomes a political game in terms of like a consistent and sustainable way. Police cannot interrupt trauma. They just can't do it. We have to fund these other people and organizations and community-based strategies that are designed to interrupt trauma, and then create spaces where people are not traumatized, right? So to be able to build decent housing, right? So there's not vacant lots and abandoned properties, to make sure people have employment and jobs, that the schools are decent, you know, and it's actually a contradiction even to the progressives, like, who keep saying, like, I argue with people on social media, like, why are you saying we need more police? Well, I mean, go talk to people's grandmothers, that's what they want. You know, the difference is, like, if you live in the suburbs, if you see a cop on the street, everybody thinks something wrong, right? They're like, oh, what's going on? Calling that berry. You see that cop? What they doing here? In Newark, if you don't see a cop, people think something is wrong. So when I go to community meetings in Newark, I ain't seen a cop on my block in 2 days, right? So, I mean, that drives you, and that's why mayors and stuff do that. They're not doing that because they want police. Their constituency is telling them, we're gonna throw you out unless I see the police, right? You can't, where's the police at? You gotta get out of here. We need cops. What are you spending the money on? I want a cop, right? Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So if you go to somebody else's neighborhood in another city, that's not the same issue, right? So, you know, while we placate people to put police officers there, you have to know in your mind that is a temporary fix. It's going to reduce crime to a certain level. So we can brag that crime is at a 50-year low, but we also had a low number of police officers because financially the city was in bad shape and the mayor had to let go of all these officers. So now that we get officers back to his health, then we stabilize the community, but stabilizing it just means instead of 116 people, 120 people getting killed, you get 60 or 50, right? Which is still too much, right? So 50 people get killed, 58, you feel like, oh, you know, but 58 families are in bad shape. And all of the 100 people that witnessed those 58 people get killed are also traumatized from that, right? That creates a cycle of violence. So we got to get it to with zero, you know, and that the police can't do that. So I got to convince the constituency of this, and I got to convince the police agencies of this, and the elected officials of this, and the folks that have the money, that we have to spend money on these things, not just these cops, because they're never going to be able to get rid of crime.
Cheyenne.
Yes. So I know earlier you was asked what was your daily day-to-day difficulties and challenges. I would just like to know what is one of your biggest accomplishments as a mayor. Like, what was one of your wow? Like, I'm proud.
By the grace of God, I had a few of those. You know, I feel like, you know, I mean, when we opened up the Shani Baraka Center, that was huge for me. I mean, personally. Mm-hmm. You know, my sister was killed by domestic violence, so it was huge for me to turn that building into something that I saw all my life as a vacant and abandoned as an eyesore for the community. And so the Shani Baraka Women's Resource Center was just a huge undertaking for me. It made my family feel good, made me feel good. And a lot of women today use that, you know. As a matter of fact, I felt good when one of the judges told our business administrator that a lady came to the court, you know, because she had nowhere else to go, and the court referred her to the Shani Baraka Center. And the judge said that the center saved her life. So that's a huge, you know, in my mind, a huge accomplishment. Getting this inclusionary zoning passed is a big deal for me, right? The fight that it took, getting people to understand what it is. People like saying, oh, you're not gonna be able to take care of everybody that's low income, inclusionary zoning, you're tricking people. No, that's like me when I was 19 telling my mother I didn't want to celebrate the Emancipation Proclamation, right? At the end of the day, it's a step in a whole bunch of things that we have to do. So I was excited when we got inclusionary passed, even though we're still fighting because people were trying to get rid of it. I'm happy that happened. And the last thing I would say is when we got control of our schools back. Excellent. Yeah.
Betsy, you have the final question.
Okay. How do you feel about, I know you're talking about before the domestic violence, but I wonder, what do you feel about the domestic violence and abuse for the children, especially in Newark? Because I saw the news every day, and a lot of children, the police not help you to the children, and what happened? Because it's many problems for the children in this town. And another thing, what are you doing for reduce this?
Right. So part of it, that's the same division, right? Youth and and family and women, that's the same division that we have to, spend more resources and time on. The police do respond. We have the problem is, prior to recently, it wasn't an aggravated assault. So if it's not like rape or sexual abuse, right? It's now it's aggravated assault. So now it's a higher crime. And so the police have to respond to it in a different way than they used to. And, we have to center more of our resources around that. 'Cause a lot of the energy is spent on stuff that's anecdotal. Like, so people believe that the killings in the city is from gangs and children. And it's just not true.
No.
Right, so they think that a bunch of young people are running around here with bandanas shooting people. That's just not the facts, right? It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but that's not the overwhelming amount of things that are on our plate, that are issues for us. And only real data helps us understand that, right? Say, listen, these are the problems, so we have to focus on this. Like, we just recently began to figure out that domestic violence and the issues that you're talking about, domestic child abuse and all of that, are real serious issues for us in the city, that we have to spend time and energy on that. And what's interesting is those kids are probably kids that are growing up committing these other crimes that we are, trying to chase them down for right now, And it's getting younger, and these kids are getting younger and younger that are doing these kind of acts. So, I mean, if I told you we had the answer to that, it would be a lie. Right? We are racking our brains every day trying to figure out, because those crimes are not predictable. You can't put a police officer in people's living room, right? In people's bedroom. So we find out about the crime after it happened, right? We could put a cop on a block when we anticipate 2 blocks of fighting with each other or shooting is going on. We could do intelligence, but those crimes are so unpredictable. It's more about us educating families and people to begin to see the signs of domestic violence, to report it, to do all these other kind of things, and being able to create spaces where people can go to and feel safe in reporting these things, right? And getting help and support, which is why the center is important, right? Because it creates a space where people can go, because listen, my sister was getting abused for years and didn't say anything to any of us, right? Mm-hmm. So you create, people don't feel comfortable talking to their own family, right? So they have to have a place to go. And we have to educate people on this. We have to, treat it like a public health issue, begin to educate kids in school, everybody else, to figure out how can we respond to or prevent some of this stuff from taking place. Yeah, and it's particularly if it's over 50% of our aggravated assaults in the city. That's a lot. I mean, it's a huge number.
And another thing, I'm sorry. In Jersey City implement, because I live in Norbergen, okay. I move over there. In Jersey City, in my public school, the district, implement the teacher go to the home visit to what's going on in the house for the children. Maybe this is what in Newark, because when the teacher involved you, the parent, you, the children, what is your environment around you, you help you, because you the authority for the children, maybe the mayor or the police, I don't know, more help you,
No, I understand. It's the same concept that they need safe places and safe people. I could talk to the superintendent about an idea like that, but ultimately, I think that we need a massive education campaign on domestic violence and domestic abuse in the school system, period. I think it's better for us to educate kids and adults on how to identify the signs, where to go to report it, why you need to report it, the importance of it, depending no matter who it is, whether it's your uncle, your father, your brother, as opposed to, just living with it, getting abused, or taking matters into your own hands. Some of the domestic violence cases are cases of women killing their spouses or boyfriends, right? So how to, we had one domestic violence case where the guy killed 2 ladies, right? that lived in the same city, that were communicating with each other on social media, by the way, warning the other person about them, right? Which is a preventable death. So both of their deaths were preventable because they were talking to each other about the thing, right? But we realized this after they were dead and tortured, by the way. If they knew where, so if one of them said, listen, you should go to the Shani Baraka Center, but it wasn't there then when that happened. And, you know, so forth and so on. If they had other information, then maybe one or both of them would be alive, right? And so those kinds of things, when I say education is important and spaces for people to go, because right now we have one in the South Ward, right? So we have to figure out how to train all of our agents, our police officers, and everybody else into dealing with those kind of domestic abuse and violence cases of children and women and men, you know, how to address it and how to deal with it. So, because it is ahead of us right now. It's way ahead of us at this point.
Mr. Mayor, we thank you for the generosity of your time today and your thoughtful vision for the city of Newark. Another round of applause for our mayor.